Hello and welcome to another episode of the Panda Perspective. Joining me once again is my good friend Kathy. How you doing, Kath?
Hi. I'm good. Happy Easter, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Happy Easter to you as well. And keeping the spirit of Christianity, why don't we talk about the Plague Tale series?
Wait, what? What does this game have to do with Christianity?
Well, I mean, you got things like the bubonic plague, the Inquisition, annoying French kids that attack you with rats. It's all in the Bible.
What are you even talking about? Show me where in the Bible you saw anything even remotely close to that.
Alright, I will. Let me just refer to my trusty Bible, which I keep on hand at all times. Let's see here. Give it a moment. And here it is. Book of Mark, verses 15. Yep, printed clear as day. Thou shalt not trust the French child with rat powers. It's right after the bit where Jesus gets into a bar fight with Satan on that boat with all the animals in it.
That's such an obvious heathen. Remind me to write to the Pope afterwards to get you, excommunicated.
Nah. I've burnt that bridge a long time ago. But anyways, let's talk about a Plague Tale series, an IP that you apparently really loved, whereas I'm a bit more lukewarm on. Am I on the money with that?
I wouldn't necessarily say I loved it. I would describe it as a wonderful mess. It had a lot of flaws, but despite that, I still really appreciated what it was trying to do from a story point of view.
Okay, I can sort of see where you're coming from. For me, this game was somewhat comparable to a Call of Duty game if the developers tried to be artsy.
Crazy.
Hang on, I'll say.
Alright.
The design philosophy is very much based off linear levels. That's ultimately there just to move the player from set piece to set piece, with every segment sort of having its own unique gimmick.
We're not going fast enough! Horses can't go any faster! You stay away! Stay back! I'll kill the lot of you!
Focus on the girl! We'll get the rest later!
You think you have it?
You got everything from your chest-high wall cover-based shooting to your rail shooters to your run towards a screen chase sequences. It's basically the same formulaic and lazy game design we've been seeing since, the Call of Duty games, I guess. Only instead of having your characters be a bunch of psychotic violent marines, you instead have them be a bunch of psychotic children with superpowers.
Well, I mean, I disagree, obviously. I think you're oversimplifying things a little too much. There's a lot more to it than what you're ultimately describing. For instance, you have a lot of puzzle designs, a lot of stealth segments.
Sure, but the puzzles were little more than just push block against wall or light fire on brazier, that kind of stuff. And the stealth segments were basically just going from point A to point B, you didn't have a lot of ways to approach the problem, other than obviously going guns blazing and just murdering everybody, at which point you're basically back to cover-based shooting for the most part.
I'll concede to you on the notion that this game is very linear, but I think there's a lot more substance to it than a Call of Duty game. I think a better comparison would be maybe a Last of Us, for example. The story itself is enough to elevate this game above your standard Activision title, in my opinion.
Sure, we can get into the story a little later, but from a level design point of view, you would agree that this game is somewhat comparable to, say, a Last of Us or a Call of Duty title, where the play is basically on rails and really doesn't have any meaningful choices to make throughout the story?
Yeah, I would describe it as a very crafted experience. The story definitely forced a lot of difficult actions on the players, so I think I can forgive the relatively linear level design.
Okay, well, like I said before, we can go into the story a little later, but for now, let's wrap up the gameplay discussion. So from what I gathered, you decided to play these games in a very subtle manner, whereas I basically did the complete opposite. Could you please walk me through your feelings towards the gameplay?
I would say that the stealth element is probably the weakest part of the game. There's very few things you can actually hide in. It's basically just tall grass or nothing, for the most part.
Better move on. Nothing here.
We've got company!
And And so a lot of the time it basically just boils down to trial and error. But the autosave is really frequent in this game, so you never have to worry about losing too much progress, so you should be safe on that regard.
Okay, so you and I basically feel the same about that. Like every time I would try my hand at stealth, I basically felt bogged down by it. As you had mentioned, there were very few areas you can hide in, and once the swarm of rats get involved, you really also don't have a lot of maneuver room, so at that point, if you're caught, your only options are to restart or try and fight it out.
Yeah, on top of that, the game isn't very good at communicating information to you. Like, there were definitely a couple of instances where I was just completely lost and not sure where the game wanted me to go, and as a result, I was forced to backtrack several times and essentially sneak past the same enemies I had already avoided, so that can definitely get a little irritating at times.
Well, exactly. This is why I found it easier to just murder everyone from the very start. That way I can focus on solving puzzles and looking for collectibles without the stress of hiding from enemies at all times.
You're such a violent psychopath, you know that?
Murder's the only thing I'm good at.
Well, since you're such an expert at it, Mr. Genghis Khan, why don't you tell me what the combat was like in this game?
I would say it's pretty, I would say it's sluggish. That's how I would describe it. Like, Amicia has a really hard time getting around obstacles, and unfortunately, you're kind of forced into using a lot of hit and run tactics, mainly because your two primary weapons are the slingshot and the crossbow, which both require a long time to wind up. So you really need to be constantly on the move just to create as much distance as possible between you and your enemies, which is extremely tiring, especially if you're also forced to babysit like a little kid. Though I imagine the hand-holding mechanic will be equally annoying for the stealth route. Am I right on that?
Yeah, I would say you're right in that it makes sneaking around a lot harder. But that's also the point of the game. Like, the idea is you're playing the role of a big sister trying to protect her little brother, right? So it does make more sense that things should be a lot more challenging than if you were by yourself, for instance.
But even in that situation, wouldn't it make more sense to just hide him somewhere while you take care of all the enemies before you eventually go back for him once you're done clearing out the area? As opposed to potentially dragging him into a fight and exposing him to danger.
Came from another of their dirty tricks. See them?
I mean, yes, but that's assuming you're going to fight and kill all the enemies. But if the intention is just to sneak by and get away, then it makes more sense to stick together as opposed to having to go back for him later on, even though it makes it a lot more likely that you're going to get caught.
See, this is why we leave kids behind in horror movies. They're basically like a kiss of death. All they do is get scared and alert the enemies. They're such a liability. I say leave them behind and save yourselves.
Wow. You're such a noble knight, aren't you?
Shut up. It's called being practical, and you know I'm right.
Sure. So if the woman of your dreams was attacked by a zombie, what, you would just leave her behind?
Well, I mean, we could cuddle for a few minutes, but
Wow.
if there's no cure, then ultimately it's,
Time to get the
Dignitas
shotgun
time.
out?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, a good old rock would do the trick.
Wow.
I need the bullets. Besides, it'll still be relatively quick. It'll be like saying ow once.
You're such a keeper, aren't you?
Totally. I get all the bitches. Anyways. So we both agreed that the combat and stealth were probably the weakest parts of the game. What would you say was the strongest?
You're probably gonna disagree with me on this, but I really like the companion system in the game. Like, you know how every level has those bits where you and our ally have to work together to navigate the swarm of rats?
We're getting there! There's another crane! I think I can help you across!
Yes! Try to move that hay bale towards me.
Throw it to me!
All right. I'm ready.
Like, small stuff like that really adds a lot to the whole us versus the world kind of vibe, which really helped this game feel rather unique.
Okay. I mean, I don't necessarily disagree. I will say this though, like, I think this game would have benefited a lot if it was in the hands of, say, like a Hazelight studio, or really just anybody who can design puzzles.
Yeah, you're totally right on that. Like, the dev team definitely reuse the same puzzles way too often. Like, every time I saw a wagon, I'm like, alright, the game wants me to push this against a wall and climb up somewhere. Like, there really wasn't a lot of imagination to it.
That and every time I saw like a loose chain, it's like, okay, I need to use my slingshot here. The game really doesn't understand how slings work, by the way. They seem to think that you can like undress armor or like open locked doors with it. It's really bizarre how they think.
Yeah. The sling is basically magic in this game.
Oh no.
Certainly. Clean shot.
Should we move on and talk about the writing in this game?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I personally thought the story was great. Would you agree with that? Or?
I would disagree with that. I think it's fair to say it has elements of a good story, but I wouldn't go as far as to say it was a good story. Like, I can see that the writer was trying to tell a story where our characters are slowly tempted towards the path of violence, but they just weren't able to put together a sensible plot that would lead our characters down this path. And so ultimately they just end up faffling about for the entire game, either chasing dreams or just waiting for bad things to happen before they can move on.
Hey, wait. So I heard of this dream and, well, I'd like to help. But first I must know what you're searching for.
All right. So it's a bit strange, but, well, go on, Hugo.
Yes! In my dream, I woke up on a beach, and I was sick and scared. But a big bird came and I followed him. I thought I was dying, but the bird showed me water that healed me. And there was a huge tree too. And that's where I wake up each time.
It really was a remarkably bad script in my opinion.
Well, I mean, hold on. Like, I'll grant you that the plot doesn't come up with intelligent reasons for the characters to do what they were doing. By the way, I'm mostly going to refer to the second game because I don't remember very much of the first.
That's fine. It doesn't change my argument at all. Didn't mean to interrupt, by the way. Please continue.
Oh, I was just going to say that we were dealing with a story where a bunch of kids are trying to escape a supernatural threat, so I'm not entirely sure what you really expected them to do other than trying to survive.
Well, I expected the characters to behave somewhat logically, like their mother at the very least, who was a alchemist or scientist for that time, should have at the very least concluded that since the rats can't swim, the smartest thing to do would be to move to an island somewhere to try and minimize the problem, as opposed to traveling from city to city and essentially bringing death and destruction everywhere.
Yes, but hang on. They weren't traveling to those places for no reason. They were doing it because they were trying to find a cure for Hugo.
You can still look for a medical solution, that's completely fine and dandy. The point I'm trying to make is that the priority should be to try and isolate the boy. Like, if somebody has tuberculosis, you don't just let them wander around in public where they can potentially spread the illness. What you do is you quarantine that person while you look for ways to treat them.
Okay, I'll grant you that, but let's say we go with your idea and assume the family decides to strand themselves on a remote island somewhere while the mother goes out to look for help. Where's the story in that situation? Like, how do you include drama in that scenario?
Well, you could still easily tell a story about the family trying to escape from civilization. Like, for example, let's assume we start them off at the center of a major populace during the early days of an outbreak. Obviously, the city will be in lockdown at this point, so people will be stuck in their homes, struggling to feed themselves or get medicine. Maybe during the night, Amicia has to sneak out in order to exchange priceless family heirlooms for Hugo's medicine. All the while, society begins to crumble around them, and as more and more people fall victim to the disease, central authority will start to collapse as well, at which point people would become desperate enough to resort to superstition rather than reason. They'll start forming mobs and eventually go after whoever they feel is responsible for the outbreak, whether that be ethnic minorities or even the people in power. And at that point, Amicia might just be like, okay, we need to get out of here right now before people start eating each other. Like, do you see what I mean when I say it's extremely easy to put together a compelling story given the setting and the subject matter?
Okay, but then what do you do about Hugo's vision of the mysterious island and the phoenix?
Oh, I would just ignore him. Like, fuck that kid and his wacky dreams. Like, seriously, if that kid had a dream where some magical mermaid had the powers to grant 7 wishes, do you think we should, search the entire ocean for it? No, you tell him to shut the fuck up and you move on.
Yeah, I'll admit that the payoff for that subplot was a little pathetic. Like, as soon as I discovered that it was all part of a cycle that kept repeating itself, like it was a destiny or something, I was pretty checked out by then.
Yeah, exactly. It takes away all agency. It's like, no, we don't have a choice in this. It's our destiny. Like, talk about an incredibly weak motive. In fact, I would argue that every character had flimsy reasons to justify their role in the story.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I had a pretty tough time buying the idea that the pirate or that mercenary knight would suddenly have a change of heart and start helping them for no reason. Like, it was pretty far-fetched.
I'm sorry.
It's alright. I had enough fun, I guess. And my boat is wrecked anyway. Just tell me we can stop this.
Well, exactly. In fact, during my playthrough, I was expecting either one of those characters to betray them at some point, because they were, well, pirates and sellswords. But instead, they ended up playing the role of their parents, essentially. It's like, what are we doing here? This is so counterproductive. Like, I thought the goal here was to try and tell a story about an older sister trying to protect her little brother from a cruel world. So why the hell of a sudden are we coddling them?
Yeah, the story does get a little hard to follow at times, because the characters can be so inconsistent. But I would say those two characters are probably not the worst example. Like, I would say the villains were probably the most guilty of that. Like, the main antagonist in this game went from "the Holy Child has returned, we're saved," to "let's use the power of the rats to conquer the world."
The light of the summer solstice shines upon us once again.
And yet, in these cold hallways, hidden from the sun, the Child of Embers still slumbers.
It is time to bring the flame of the Phoenix
The Phoenix.
to his dormant
That's your
embers.
word. Thus will we prove that we deserve to care for him. Like mother.
Like father.
A few moments later.
Whatever you're planning with him, it won't work. He will destroy you.
He'll destroy what I tell him to. We'll set this world aflame. And I'll forge an empire from that fire. A more righteous one.
That's just what happens when all your characters are reduced down to nothing but basic plot tools. It's like every 30 minutes or so, the plot forces our characters to pick straws, and whoever draws the shortest has to go insane in order to move the story forward. It's just so dumb, because the script is left at the mercy of like a hack. Oh, I mean a credited scriptwriter name here.
I wouldn't necessarily call him a hack. Hang on, let me look him up. I mean, I still overall really liked the story, and I know you even admitted that there were elements of the story you enjoyed. So, hang on, here it is. Yeah, it looks like this guy was credited for Life is Strange, and you loved that game, right?
I did really like that game, but I also thought it was a fluke. Like, there were a lot of weird, awkward dialogue scenes in that game, but that kind of worked out because Max was like a very socially awkward character, so in a way, the writers got lucky. In fact, as soon as the attention panned away from Max, that's when you saw the cracks.
Huh. It's interesting that you brought that up, actually, because I did notice that there was something a bit off about the characters in the Plague Tale series. I just couldn't quite figure out what it was.
Oh, I can tell you exactly what the problem is.
Yeah?
It's the fact that all the characters felt like a bunch of modern-day people wearing medieval clothes. They didn't feel genuine. Like, everybody was just way too tolerant of Hugo. Like, every time the kid says something stupid, all the grown-ups in the room have to de-escalate down to his level just to accommodate him. It's like, what the fuck? This isn't modern-day society. This is the medieval times. Can you please get into your characters?
Okay, yeah, I can see what you mean. Like, Hugo definitely steers the conversation a little too often, and that can definitely get a little annoying, especially when someone's like trying to explain what's going on in the story.
Exactly, it's like, quiet kid, the grown-ups are talking. Like, back then, adults wouldn't really put up with their children speaking out of turn. Like, that's more of a modern day thing where parents would coddle their children. Like, I'm pretty sure our main characters were from like a minor nobility, so they really should have understood proper etiquette. And so if Hugo's interrupting in a conversation with the Count, then everybody should have been like, no Hugo, bad Hugo, and, well, you know, give him a good old paddling.
Let me get this straight. The reason why you didn't like this game was because there wasn't enough child abuse.
It's not the only reason, but ultimately, yes. I mean, listen, hear me out. Like, corporal punishment was a thing back then. So if the writer wanted to have like a consistent tone or have sympathetic characters, then he should have implemented those themes into his story.
Why is your heart so full of evil?
It's a matter of whether or not you want to tell a dark story. That's all it comes down to.
I can't wait for the day when you finally become a parent. Like, are you gonna be one of those people who like tells their kids to follow strangers into vans or something?
Oh no, that's never gonna happen. Like, I would never head into a bedroom without at least 5 layers of condoms and like a hazmat suit. back to my point, like, can we at the very least agree that the whole point of this game was to tell a story about how Hugo slowly becomes a villain over time and we're supposed to feel sorry at the end that we had to kill him? Like, oh, spoiler alert.
Whoa, spoilers!
It's fine, I'll put up a spoiler warning when I'm editing this video, no one will notice. But do you at the very least agree with my point?
As in, do I agree that the whole point of the story was to set up Hugo as the main villain at the end?
That's right, yeah.
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, sure. I don't think they were trying to turn him into like a Joffrey Baratheon or anything like that, but I do agree that he was supposed to become the monster that couldn't control his powers and was ultimately a danger to both himself and the people around him. So in that, I agree with you.
Okay, but then wouldn't you agree that the most sensible thing for the writer to do would be to try and get us to feel sympathetic towards Hugo?
I mean, yeah, okay.
Would you also agree that the most effective way to create sympathy is to have your characters go through some sort of struggle or conflict throughout the story?
Yeah.
Then shouldn't it stand to reason that the last thing you want to do is to have the majority of the characters coddle Hugo, especially if they're also meant to be the antagonist?
Yes. During the brighter days, all the people of La Cuna are one, united around the Child of Embers.
So? I love it!
Haha! Et bon vivant!
Well, I mean, I guess I do ultimately agree with that train of thought, but I do want to point out something, that I think the Count was meant to be a surprise villain. Like, I think his tolerance of Hugo and Amicia was mostly there as like a red herring for the audience. I mean, of course, it also comes with its own set of problems. Like, obviously, it makes him look very bipolar and irrational at times. But that aside, I do want to address something that you brought up a little earlier. When you said that the whole point of the story was to try and set up Hugo as the main villain, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think the point of the story was more about Amicia coming to terms that she can't protect everyone, and no matter how hard she tries. And so ultimately, the only thing left for her to do is to let go of Hugo and move on with her life.
Okay, that is fine. I don't necessarily disagree with that. But how is that an excuse for the writer's inability to make us feel sympathetic towards Hugo? Because anybody who interacts with him automatically devolves into like a permissive parent.
It's not an excuse for that. I do agree with you ultimately that the story would have been better if everybody didn't coddle him, or at the very least if he wasn't the center of everyone's attention. But that being said, the point I was trying to make was that I could put up with all these little problems because they weren't the centerpiece of the story. In my opinion, I think the story was still more focused on Amicia slowly picking up the burdens of responsibility, being forced to make hard choices, and eventually learning to let go. So while I do agree with you that the writer did a poor job setting up Hugo's character arc, it just wasn't a big deal breaker for me.
Okay, well that's fair. But since you brought up Amicia, should we talk about her character? Like, for me personally, she was probably the most poorly written character in the entire series.
Her character definitely flip-flops between the we should never use our powers for evil kind of character to the I have become the angel of death, all shall fear me kind of person.
Wanted to save them!
Hugo! You don't kill people just like that!
Why? You do it all the time!
Because...
And I can kill quicker than you!
See? They're nothing! Nothing to be scared of!
Amicia, what are you doing? We have to go!
No! I'm tired of being afraid! I'll show them that it's over!
Like, she definitely bounces a little too casually between those two extremities, but I'll be curious to hear what you have to say about her character. Could you elaborate?
Yeah, sure. So for me, Amicia was the one with the least amount of organic growth. Like, her character was completely at the mercy of the script, which is why, as you had pointed out yourself, that her morals can just switch on a dime as soon as it's convenient for the plot. Like, you approach this game in a much more pacifist manner. Like, in your experience, did you find her character transformation to be more organic in your playthrough?
No. Like, at a certain point, the game still forced me into a warehouse where I had to fight a bunch of enemies, at which point Amicia basically transforms into Attila the Hun for no reason. But even then, I would have been okay with it if that was the start of a character transformation, but she kind of just bounces back and forth all over the place, which does make her character arc feel a little insincere. Like, you and I basically felt the same way about The Last of Us Part 2, but Amicia's character arc here felt way more out of place than out of Ellie's. Like with Ellie, you can at the very least argue that Joel was a terrible parent, so she was ultimately set up to become a violent psychopath. But there's nothing like that here.
Exactly. Well, that's what I meant by her character was just completely at the mercy of the plot. It's like, we need somebody to fight these bad guys. Amicia, it's smashing time. Or, this person now wants to join our merry band. Amicia, you have to trust him now. And she's like, alright, even though he just tried to kill us in a previous scene and obviously can't be trusted, I'm gonna trust him anyway. Like, she just doesn't have any real agency throughout the story. I mean, what was the actual reason for her to chase after Hugo's dreams?
Because it's her destiny. It's all part of a cycle that's repeating itself. But also because he's her brother and she loves him. So wouldn't it stand to reason that she would from time to time follow her feelings, as opposed to what logically makes sense?
But that's just not an excuse to throw common sense out the window. Like, why are we trusting all these strangers? Why not just disguise ourselves and travel incognito? And even if you do want to play the card of, oh, they're just letting their feelings get the better of them, wouldn't that be more suited for the mother instead of Amicia?
You do make a good point on that, I'll grant that to you. Their mother was definitely like a token character. I don't really remember what she did throughout the story or even what her name was.
Yeah, nobody does. She was basically just a plot device to be used whenever it was convenient.
Yeah, but just to address your previous comments, like, I do think you're being a little too harsh on Amicia. Like, keep in mind, she is still just a teenager. Like, it's not unreasonable for her to make stupid choices because she's overconfident from time to time, nor do I really fault her for trusting other people because, let's face it, she's still going to be dependent on adults to a certain degree. And as for her doubling down on chasing Hugo's dreams, you have to keep in mind, they were desperate at that point in time. Like, what else could she do, other than throw up her hands and roll over?
But hold on, isn't there an obvious contradiction there? Like, are we trying to paint Amicia as the sole guardian that's trying to protect Hugo from a world that's out to get him? Or is she supposed to be the struggling teenager who can only survive by putting her trust in whatever adults happen to be nearby?
I think she's supposed to be the struggling teen that's trying to get by, but she is also in over her head. Like, I think the story is trying to portray her as somebody who's trying her absolute best to protect Hugo, but she maybe deep down understands that she can't do it by herself, which is why she partners up with pirates and mercenaries, even though it's probably not very smart of her to do that.
Okay, but how does that justify the parts where she's suddenly able to murder dozens of armed soldiers with ease? Or how at one point she decided to take Hugo away from their mother, all for the sake of finding that mysterious island Hugo was dreaming about?
It doesn't. Like, I'm not going to defend either one of those two bits because I ultimately agree with you in that Amicia's transformation into a psychotic killer felt very forced onto her rather than something organic. And also the subplot for following Hugo's dreams to the mysterious island basically amounted to nothing.
It started here.
What?
The Justinian plague.
He was sad. So sad and angry.
So that's why the macula brought us here? Oh, there has to be something. Scroll?
Like, you could have easily have reached the exact same payoff by just having Lucas discover an old medical journal or something that recounted the events of the previous plague, and it wouldn't have made a single difference to the overall story.
Right. But the point I was trying to make was that, in my opinion, I think the story was trying to paint Amicia as a flawed character. She's somebody who's trying to take control of a situation that's completely out of her hands, and in the process is making a ton of mistakes, which is something that's going to haunt her for the rest of her life, and she's just going to have to learn to live with.
Oh, okay, so you're basically seeing this as like a coming-of-age story where we have a teenage girl that's been given the burden of parenthood, and so the story is essentially about her dealing with the challenges of responsibility and ultimately facing the consequences of her actions.
That's right, and it is so much better than your typical girl boss character who's always right and never has to face any consequences to her actions, which is just something we see way too often in movies and TV shows these days.
Okay, I think I can see where you're coming from.
Well, if you don't mind, let me flip this question around on you. How would you have set up Amicia's story in this series?
How would I do it?
Yeah.
Well, let's break it down logically, I guess. So if the goal is to have Amicia eventually take on the burdens of responsibility, then it should make sense that we want to start her off as a relatively selfish character. Like, basically, you don't want her to instantly be protective of Hugo from the very beginning. That's something she needs to develop over time. And so I think it would be a good idea for her to be somewhat antagonistic towards Hugo, at least for the early parts of the game anyways.
Okay, but how would you set that up in a way that actually makes sense? Like, can you give me a sensible reason why Amicia might be antagonistic towards Hugo at the start of the game?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there could be a variety of reasons why Amicia might not get along with Hugo at the very start. For instance, maybe she blames Hugo for being the one who got sick in the first place and getting the family quarantined. So her attitude could easily be, well, you just had to play in the alley with those rats, you dumb kid. Now I'm stuck in the house with you for the rest of my life. Or it could simply be due to the fact that her mother is now prioritizing Hugo over her. Like, since Hugo is sick, it makes sense that the mother might be pressuring Amicia to sneak out in order to get medicine, and that is obviously going to be dangerous for Amicia. Like, there are plenty of sensible ways to establish why Amicia might be hostile towards Hugo, but the important takeaway from this is that Amicia, at the very start, cannot be the acting guardian of Hugo. That role has to belong solely to the mother, and it's something that Amicia has to step into once the mother dies.
Okay, but how do you get Amicia to step into that role if she initially hates Hugo?
So what you can do in this situation is that you make the mother's death entirely or partially Amicia's fault. Like, maybe one day Amicia was told to go out to get medicine and she was like, no, I'm not doing it today because it's too risky or something. And so ultimately the mother has to be the one that goes out, essentially putting herself at risk. She obviously is going to get caught. And since this is medieval Europe, people are going to be very superstitious. They're going to accuse her of breaking quarantine, maybe even witchcraft or even spreading the plague. And as a result, she's going to get publicly executed, which means that Amicia, who's probably blaming herself for this mess, is going to be left as the de facto parent for Hugo.
Okay, but maybe let me rephrase my question. How do you transform someone who's initially like, this is all your fault, Hugo, I don't want to babysit you, to somebody who's like, I have to risk my entire life to protect this child at all costs kind of person?
Oh, that's just going to come down to how you frame your characters. So, for example, I would frame Amicia as somebody who's extremely depressed by the situation. She's just constantly blaming herself, just in a mess, like, oh my god, what have I done? Hugo's life is going to be in danger and I'm all he's got now. Meanwhile, you want to frame Hugo as somebody who's trying his very best to cheer Amicia up, despite the fact that he's getting increasingly sick himself. You don't necessarily have to have him say a lot of words or even be the center of attention. Just have him do some subtle things around the house, whether that be through small chores or just sharing food with Amicia or even just giving her a hug. Basically, you just want to communicate to the audience that he's a good kid, and that's how you get Amicia to bond with him over time, because she's going to realize that ultimately all they have is each other.
Okay, that works. I mean, I'll definitely buy it. But where do you take the story from there?
Well, the next logical thing to do would be to send her on the path of becoming a hardened survivalist. So this will be the second act of your story, where as resources begin to dwindle, she will be forced to seek help from increasingly shady figures. These will be your thieves, your smugglers, your pirates, you know, the kind of people that you don't want to work with unless you absolutely have to. And obviously at that point, things are going to go wrong for her. Maybe some people are cheating her out of deals, maybe she's getting betrayed by others, which would then give her no other choice but to resort to using force. And this is where you get to inject the moral grayness into a character, like for instance...
This is when she has to like steal and kill people?
Yeah, exactly. And obviously you don't want her to murder an entire legion of soldiers or anything like that, but I'm talking more of something like 1 or 2 people at most. Like, these are going to be the first people she's ever had to kill, and obviously it's going to devastate her, but it's also going to mark a point in her story where she's essentially crossed a line that there's no turning back from.
Okay, so I see where you're going with. So what would be the ultimate conclusion to your story? Like, what is all this building up towards?
Well, eventually the situation would just get so bad, like I'm talking angry mobs, heads on spikes kind of bad, to the point where Amicia's like, alright, we just gotta get out of here. And so the final act might just be her and her brother trying to escape the city with the help of like a smuggler or something. And the climax of the story would be that she and her brother finally reach the docks, and the smuggler there would be like, hey, that kid has the plague, I'm not bringing him along, that wasn't part of the deal. At which point she'll have no other choice but to fight and kill. And maybe as a consequence of the struggle, she could have been horribly wounded to the point where it was clearly impossible for her to take care of a sick Hugo in her state, at which point she may have realized that the only humane thing left to do would be to give him a merciful death. Wow. And whether Amicia survives at the end of the story could be left ambiguous for all I care.
Okay, I'll admit that I'm impressed by your version of the story. Like, you obviously have very good instincts when it comes to writing stories.
Oh, thank you.
But I did notice that in your version, there wasn't any room for like the supernatural parts. Is that intentional?
Well, yeah, I mean, the supernatural parts just didn't work for me in the game. Like, do we really need a story about bad guys trying to take over the world using the bubonic plague, or an entire city being destroyed by a tsunami of rats? Like, what are we, trying to make a Michael Bay movie or something?
Well, I mean, people do pay money to see those movies.
Yeah, but they're the kind of people who like shiny objects and loud noises.
Get off your high horse. I've seen the kind of animes you watch.
That's different.
How so?
Because reasons.
Alright, whatever. So, Cheeky, would you recommend this game?
Yeah, sure, why not? The characters are a bit wacky and the overall story is kind of a mess, but there's a good game in there somewhere. Maybe get on discount. How about you, Kathy? Would you recommend it?
Well, yeah, I think I would. I mean, I'm a lot more hesitant now thanks to our conversation.
Well, I do have that effect on people.
Were you one of those little kids who like smash up other people's toys just because you didn't like them?
No comment?
Well, that explains quite a lot actually.